Want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money, all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify, and when you want to take conversations with your fans to the next level, Q&A and polls are the best way to get them talking. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions, and best of all, it's totally free. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started today.
Big Ten, Big Ten, Big Ten, football talk. Big Ten, Big Ten, Big Ten, football talk. Big Ten, Big Ten, Big Ten, football talk. Big Ten, Big Ten, Big Ten, football talk.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Big Ten Football Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Guggenheim. We're going to be talking about some of the news with the new commissioner, as well as some of the problems that are happening with the outgoing commissioner, Kevin Warren. What is his legacy? Maybe, honestly, more, what's the legacy of Jim Delaney, who preceded him? Make sure to like, follow, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram. I have not been the most present. I was looking back at my last published podcast, and it was 30 days ago, May 1st. Things will begin to pick up, and I'll start putting out maybe a podcast every 2 weeks, or at least maybe once a week starting in the summer. Particularly July, when preseason magazines start coming out and everything, I'll start getting more into the swing of things. Right now, I'm just kind of enjoying life, enjoying graduating from seminary, which was great, enjoying the end of the semester, the school semester. But I've been wanting to talk about what's going on with the whole commissioner stuff, and I wanted to talk about it when Tony Petitti, when he was named the commissioner, but I just didn't have enough information about it. And then I wanted to talk about Kevin Warren and his legacy, and then news came out this past week that Kevin Warren did not communicate appropriately about giving the rights to the Big Ten championship game, I think in 2027, to NBC instead of Fox. And Fox is like, hey, now, you owe us like $50-60 million, something like that. Basically, every school's getting a pretty big bill this week. And so that felt like it was a faux pas. We'll just call it a faux pas for Kevin Warren, which I think his legacy is probably filled with them in his short tenure in the Big Ten. But it got me thinking about several things. So this podcast, it's going to be short. I think I always say things are going to be short, and then they end up being a lot longer than I thought. But I want to talk about legacy, and then what am I excited about with Petitti coming in as the commissioner moving forward? And I think where I'd like to start with Kevin Warren is this. He is very much a flawed commissioner. At the same time, he had to oversee a conference that had to deal with an unprecedented event. Now, I think other conferences, namely the SEC, handled it way better than he did. But the reality is, no one really gets. I'm sure they train for emergency things. And in fact, I saw that Kevin Warren was he was hired, I think, in the NFL for a couple years to be an emergency planner. But no one ever prepares or is prepared for a national pandemic that threatens everything, right? And we didn't, nobody really knew much about COVID-19, even in June of 2020, July 2020, August 2020. And so he had unprecedented circumstances. And at the same time, while I don't think he was directly responsible, I don't think he was like the chief engine behind this move, he is the commissioner that secured USC and UCLA joining the conference. And I know I've gone ad nauseum about the impact of that, but the reality is, without that, the Big Ten might have been in trouble down the road, particularly against the SEC. Now, I'm not so sure the Big Ten isn't the premier conference, despite the fact that the SEC has all the athletic advantages. The Big Ten financially, even with this very big oversight by Kevin Warren, their economic security, barring, catastrophe down the road, is very much solidified because you've got two very national brands, a blue blood in USC, and now the three biggest TV networks, TV markets in all of college football, in all of the country, in New York, Chicago, and LA. I've talked about this. You don't need to hear me talk about this again. And so I am not a Kevin Warren guy, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But the reality is, every misstep he has made pales in comparison to that addition. Because regardless of all of the other ways that Kevin Warren has failed, and he did fail, USC and UCLA coming to the Big Ten overshadows all of it. And it overshadows it by a mile. Like, it's not even a question. And it's a bigger deal than the SEC getting Texas and Oklahoma because of the TV networks, because of the tradition, because of the expansion. Listen, Texas is probably the biggest brand in college football, but it's not. You're not there. The SEC isn't adding anything TV wise, and so and because of that, because of USC, because of UCLA, not only did Kevin Warren secure a new TV contract, it was a $1 billion TV contract. Now, they're going to lose some money because of this misstep. But the reality is they were able to break away from ESPN. They're now on every major network outside of ABC. They're going to have CBS 3:30 time slot, NBC prime time, and they're going to have the big noon kickoff. Like, they get all the best spots on all the best networks. Like, and then, by the way, if a team makes the playoff or makes a bowl game, they'll be on ESPN. So the Big Ten, despite the fact that they had what I would argue was a fairly incompetent commissioner, is in better shape. Which means that despite Kevin Warren's missteps, his legacy is mixed, but ultimately I think will be seen in a good light. Because if you look at the whole of the conference, could it have been in a much better spot? Sure. Like, I think the way that he did 2020 was not helpful to the Big Ten. but it really didn't do much to damage it in the long run. Like, I was very fearful because I thought recruiting would go down. I thought people would view the Big Ten as not caring about athletics. But the reality is that really the only consequence, and I'm not even sure if I would go this far, is I think you can make a case that Ohio State really missed a golden opportunity for a national championship. And even then, I don't think Ohio State at full strength beats Alabama that year 2 out of 10 times. It's a generational team, first rounders all over the place. I mean, Ohio State drilled Clemson, and they could barely put up 24 on Bama. And I get it. Fields was hurt. They had a lot of guys out because of COVID. It wasn't going to matter, right? Like, Devontae Smith wasn't going to be covered. It was a massacre. And they were going to massacre anybody and everybody in that game. That's just the reality. You can make the argument that if Ohio State had more time, if the COVID protocols weren't so strict, if they hadn't canceled, yada, yada, yada. But the long-term impact of that was negligible, right? Like, Penn State and Michigan both had terrible years. They're both stronger than ever. Like, Michigan's been in the playoff now 2 years in a row. Like, they are better than they were in every way post-COVID. Penn State didn't have a great 2021, but they were a Rose Bowl winning team. They won 11 games last year, have maybe one of the premier quarterback prospects in Drew Allar. Their recruiting is on the up and up. They've beaten an SEC team twice, both once at Auburn and once at home. I get it, Auburn wasn't great, but the big three programs in the Big Ten are better. And then you look at the rest of the Big Ten. Wisconsin has leveled up with Luke Fickell. Michigan State had a really good 2021 downturn last year, but they could still be a good team. I think Iowa is Iowa, right? Maryland had a great year last year. Purdue has had a good run. Now Jeff Brom is leaving, but you have better coaching. You have 3 legitimate playoff contenders every year. I mean, this is a strong conference. It's strong athletically, it's strong financially, and it's getting better. So the fact that that's the case, despite Kevin Warren's missteps, leads me to one conclusion. And it's not that Kevin Warren did a great job. Because Kevin Warren, with what happened with COVID, could have destroyed the conference. At least from an athletic perspective. Could have destroyed it. What he just did in not communicating the terms of the deal to Fox and NBC and the rest of the Big Ten and them finding out, and it's a big whoopsie, the Big Ten is better for losing Kevin Warren. And so it leads me to this conclusion. How good was Jim Delaney? How ridiculously amazing of a commissioner was he? Because this conference, despite all of Kevin Warren's incompetence, is secure financially and is in the position it's in, despite the fact that Jim Delaney reigned over one of the darkest periods athletically for the Big Ten. Go back to 2006 to 2013. The Big Ten was in shambles. Ohio State was not keeping it close with SEC teams. They were getting obliterated. It was a moral victory to lose only by 2 scores to LSU. It was a moral victory to only lose to USC by 3 points when USC had a freshman quarterback. And Ohio State was the number one team in the Big Ten. Michigan was down. Penn State was down. Ohio State and Penn State had major NCAA infractions, including one of the worst cover-ups in the history of the NCAA. Regardless of what you believe about it, with Joe Paterno, with Jerry Sandusky, what you believe the real facts are, the reality is the impact was maybe the worst since SMU in the 80s. And somehow Delaney was able to maneuver the conference in a way where they got better. And he did it because of small, smart moves. He created the Big Ten Network, which ended up being a cash cow. He expanded the conference. He added Penn State in 1990. Brilliant move. Adds a blue blood. Added Nebraska, which is, no offense to Nebraska fans, I love y'all, but was negligible. They're a blue blood, but also there's not much. The name is bigger than the program at this point. But then they had Maryland and Rutgers, and everybody at the time was like, who cares? Well, you know what? Money talks. New York, D.C., Baltimore. That's a big deal. He was able to get participation for the Big Ten in all sorts of bowl games. He got their name in the door for the BCS. I mean, he just, you look at everything that he did. He helped implement the first college football instant replay system. He negotiated with CBS to get a $6 billion 11-year contract for the NCAA tournament. And so he made everybody richer, but he especially made the Big Ten richer. And it was his vision of moving out of the Midwest to the rest of the country that led to where they are today. And so how did the Big Ten survive the absolute mess that Kevin Warren put them in? Which, by the way, let's just not just ignore the fact that there was very little notice, at least from the public perspective, of Kevin Warren leaving, right? Jim Delaney gave them, I think, a year heads up. Kevin Warren, it was just announced, January 12th, I'm gone. He was just named the new team president and chief executive officer of the Chicago Bears. Great. Right? How did the Big Ten survive this? Because Jim Delaney built a ridiculous foundation that nothing was going to destroy it. Like nothing was gonna crush it. So that's my takeaway from all this. Jim Delaney, looking back, might be the greatest college football commissioner of all time. I don't think it's an overstatement to say that, because he was fighting an uphill battle athletically, reputation, image, everything. And he put them in a place where they survived maybe the worst commissioner that the Big Ten could have had. And the conference is actually better. So what does that mean for the legacy of Kevin Warren? I think he'll be remembered as an cool. Like they got USC and UCLA. That's pretty good. I think that forgives a lot of ills, despite what you think about him. He was not a great commissioner, which leads to the future. So Jim Delaney built, I think, a foundation that's going to take a lot to wear away. I don't think Tony Petitti is going to wear it down more. I think he's going to build on it, and I think he's going to do a great job. I don't know a lot about Tony, but he has a very different perspective. He was the chief operating officer of the major leagues, Major League Baseball. He has a lot of experience in sports programming, sports media. He was in charge of day-to-day operations at CSTV, which was then purchased by the CBS Corporation. And so he was at CBS, was behind the scenes at CBS. And so he has been involved in both professional sports and sports broadcasting and executive leadership for 25 years, 30 years, something like that. And so to me, that tells me everything about this hire. Not everything. That's an arrogant statement. That's a big statement. It tells me a lot about this hire. This hire is about improving their brand, their reputation, and their visibility. Right? You don't hire a guy who's known for sports broadcasting unless if you're thinking about how to make the brand and your credibility and your visibility increase, right? Remember, Kevin Warren was he was in front office management. He was a chief operating officer in the NFL for an NFL franchise. It was all about team management at the professional level. That's not what this is, right? Certainly you have to think about brand management for an NFL franchise, but this is particularly targeted at media. And if you look at how Jim Delaney built the Big Ten, he did it with strategic additions, but then a lot of influence in the media, right? Creation of the Big Ten Network, media. Bowl game participation. What do bowl games do? They advertise, media, right? BCS, media deals, right? NCAA tournament with CBS, media deal. He is using his he used his influence in the media space to give them more visibility, more credibility. I think that's why they hired Tony Petitti, and I think it's brilliant. I think it's brilliant because you know what? What do you need to do with a conference now that has a program in every major network or media market in the country? You got to sell it. You got to make it be the best product out there. Well, guess what? You just got a guy who's going to do that. And now you've got Ohio State, you've got Michigan, you've got Penn State, you've got Michigan State, you've got Wisconsin, you've got USC, UCLA, Nebraska with Matt Rule. You have all these now programs that you can sell, not just to the Midwest, not just to college football diehards, but now you're thinking, how do I get this product to the mainstream? And you hire a guy who's had to think about that for the past 25 years. He did it. He did it with CBS. He did it with the MLB Network. And now you're going to have him do it for the Big Ten. So it's a really, really smart move, I think. And I think the future is bright for Tony Petitti. I think the future is bright for the Big Ten because you have a guy who's thinking about the essentially the lifeblood of the conference, which is ultimately revenue. So I've said it before on this podcast. I don't think the SEC is in trouble because I think you have too many blue bloods. But I think the reality is you're looking at a college football world where it's the SEC, the Big Ten, and everybody else. And you're hearing whispers of it even now, right? The ACC, a lot of teams want to get out. The Pac-12 is cratering. The Big 12, no offense, they're going to be fairly irrelevant after Texas and Oklahoma leave. And I don't mean that. Like, there's a lot of good teams in the Big 12, but nobody has the cachet like Texas and Oklahoma. And so now you've got to compete head-to-head with the SEC. Athletically, the SEC has dominated at the top. So what do you got to do? You have to market the stuffing out of your conference. And eventually, if you do that, if you get the revenue, if you get the publicity, if you get the visibility, at some point recruiting will start to work in the Big Ten's favor. So I think it's a good strategy, it's a good move, it's a great hire. And so what are my key takeaways? I've talked a lot. What does this mean? One, Kevin Warren's legacy is going to be fine. I think a lot of people don't like him right now. I'm not a Kevin Warren guy. He had several failures. Ultimately, he's going to be seen in a good light in 10 years. Because he got the biggest expansion deal with USC and UCLA that they could have asked for. Cures a lot of ills. So that's my first takeaway. Second takeaway, Jim Delaney is the reason why Kevin Warren will be seen in a somewhat positive light 10 years down the road. Because Jim Delaney built such a strong foundation that not even an abysmal tenure could derail it. And my third takeaway is I think Tony Petitti is a great hire. And I think it could be a bright future for the Big Ten in athletics over the next decade or two, as they continue to build their brand, build visibility. They got the right guy from the right background. So that's it for the Big Ten Football Talk podcast. This has been Zach Guggenheim. Make sure to leave a review. Signing off. Take care. God bless.